Meredith Cole had been working night security at the Ocean View Research Institute for exactly 4 months, and she'd grown to love the solitude. While most people found the empty corridors and darkened laboratories unsettling, she found them peaceful. The building had a different personality, at night quiet, contemplative, almost sacred. During the day, it buzzed with activity, researchers hurrying between labs, graduate students debating theories in the hallways, and administrators rushing to meetings. But after 10 p.m., the building belonged to her. Her routine was methodical and thorough. She'd start at the East Wing, checking each laboratory and office, ensuring windows were locked and equipment was properly secured. The Marine Biology Department always took the longest because of all the specialized tanks and monitoring systems that needed verification. Tonight felt no different as she made her way through the familiar corridors, her flashlight beam dancing. Across doorframes and equipment, the Ocean View Research Institute was renowned for its cutting-edge marine research. Located just 50 yards from the Pacific coastline, it attracted scientists from around the world who came to study everything from microscopic plankton to massive whale migration patterns. Meredith took pride in protecting this important work, even if she didn't fully understand the complexities of what happened within these walls during daylight hours. As she approached Lab 7, something immediately caught her attention. A thin line of light was visible beneath the door unusual, because all labs were supposed to be secured and darkened by 9 p.m. She paused, checking her checklist. Dr. Harrison Webb's laboratory. She knew him by sight, a tall, somewhat disheveled man in his early 40s who always nodded politely when their paths crossed during shift changes. Meredith pulled out her master keyring and approached the door cautiously. Institute policy was clear about unauthorized after-hours access, but there could be legitimate reasons for someone to be working late. Perhaps Dr. Webb had received permission she wasn't aware of, or maybe there was an emergency with one of his research projects. She pressed her ear to the door and heard something that made her pause soft, rhythmic breathing. Not the sounds of active work, but something more peaceful. Someone was definitely inside, but they seemed to be resting. Her hand hovered over her radio. Protocol dictated that she should call this in immediately, but something made her hesitate. In her 4 months here, she'd learned that the researchers often pushed themselves to exhaustion. The pressure to publish, secure funding, and make breakthrough discoveries created an environment where scientists regularly worked 16-hour days. Instead of calling for backup, she decided to investigate quietly. She turned her key slowly, minimizing any sound, and cracked the door open just enough to peer inside. What she saw stopped her completely. Dr. Webb was slumped over his workstation, fast asleep, but that wasn't what caught her attention. Surrounding him were tanks she'd never seen before, dozens of them, filled with what appeared to be living organisms that pulsed with an ethereal blue-green light. The entire laboratory had been transformed into something that looked more like an underwater cave than a typical research facility. Equipment she didn't recognize hummed quietly in the background. There were microscopes connected to computer monitors, displaying complex data streams, filtration systems that seemed far more advanced than standard lab equipment, and what appeared to be pressurized chambers containing specimens that glowed like living jewels. Dr. Webb's clothes were wrinkled and salt-stained, suggesting he'd been working directly with seawater samples. His hands, still resting on a keyboard, were marked with small cuts, probably from handling marine specimens. Research papers were scattered across every available surface, covered with handwritten notes and diagrams that looked like they belonged in a science fiction novel. Meredith realized she was witnessing something far more significant than a simple case of someone working late. This was clearly an extensive, unauthorized research project that had been operating under the radar for who knows how long. She faced a dilemma that went far beyond standard security protocols. Should she wake him and risk disrupting what might be groundbreaking research? Should she report the security violation and potentially destroy months or years of scientific work? Or should she quietly close the door and pretend she'd never seen anything? As she watched Dr. Webb sleep peacefully among his glowing specimens, Meredith realized that whatever decision she made in the next few minutes would have consequences far beyond her night shift routine. Dr. Harrison Webb woke with a start, his neck aching from sleeping hunched over his workstation. The soft hum of filtration systems and the gentle glow of bioluminescent specimens reminded him where he was. He checked his watch, 3:47 a.m. He'd been unconscious for nearly 2 hours, which meant his latest batch of cultures had been developing without observation. Harrison rubbed his eyes and looked around his transformed laboratory. What had started 6 months ago as a simple side project had evolved into something that could revolutionize underwater exploration technology. The organisms floating in his custom tanks weren't just beautiful. They were potentially worth millions of dollars in commercial applications. He'd discovered them during a routine deep-sea collection expedition off the Monterey Canyon. While his official research focused on traditional marine ecosystems, these particular specimens had caught his attention because of their unique bioluminescent properties. Unlike other glowing marine organisms, these creatures could modulate their light output in response to specific chemical stimuli, essentially creating a biological communication system. The implications were staggering. If he could decode their light patterns and replicate the underlying biochemistry, it could lead to breakthrough developments in underwater communications, deep-sea navigation systems, and even medical imaging technology. The military applications alone would be worth billions. But Harrison knew the realities of academic research. If he reported his discovery through official channels, the Institute would immediately involve corporate partners and patent lawyers. His research would be compartmentalized, classified, and ultimately controlled by entities more interested in profit than scientific advancement. He'd seen it happen to colleagues who'd made significant discoveries. They'd become employees of their own research, following corporate directives rather than pursuing pure science. So he'd made the decision to continue his work in secret, using his own funding and conducting experiments during off hours when the building was empty. He'd converted Lab 7 into a specialized facility for studying bioluminescent organisms, installing equipment he'd purchased with his personal savings and small grants. He'd diverted from other projects. The work was exhausting but exhilarating. Each night, he'd arrive after the official day shift ended and work until dawn, documenting the organism's behavior, analyzing their biochemical processes, and slowly piecing together the mechanisms behind their remarkable abilities. He'd already made several breakthrough discoveries that he'd documented in encrypted files stored on his personal computer. Harrison stood up and stretched, looking at his latest results on the computer monitor. The organisms were responding to new stimuli in ways he'd never observed before. Their light patterns were becoming increasingly complex, almost as if they were developing a more sophisticated communication system in response to his controlled environment. He thought about the conversation he'd had with his graduate assistant, Tommy Chun, the previous week. Tommy had been asking questions about his late nights and unusual equipment purchases. The young man was perceptive and had clearly noticed that something significant was happening outside the scope of their official research projects. Harrison had been considering bringing Tommy into his confidence. The research was becoming too complex for one person to handle alone, and Tommy had both the technical skills and the discretion necessary for this type of sensitive work. But involving another person would also increase the risk of discovery. As he prepared to begin another round of observations, Harrison heard a soft sound in the hallway outside his laboratory. He froze, listening intently. The night security Guard made rounds at predictable intervals, but this seemed earlier than usual. He quickly dimmed his work lights and moved away from the door, hoping that whoever was outside would continue past without. Investigating the unusual activity in Lab 7. The footsteps paused outside his door, and Harrison held his breath, realizing that his months of secret research might be about to come to an abrupt end. Victoria Ashworth arrived at her office that Wednesday morning to find an unusual message waiting on her voicemail. Meredith Cole, the night security guard, had requested an urgent meeting about an irregular situation discovered during routine patrol. Victoria had been the Ocean View Research Institute's administrator for 12 years, and urgent security meetings were never about anything simple. At 8:30 a.m. sharp, Meredith knocked on her door. The young woman looked tired but determined as she took a seat across from Victoria's desk. What she described over the next 20 minutes left Victoria both impressed and deeply concerned. "You're telling me that Dr. Webb has essentially created an unauthorized laboratory within our facility?" Victoria asked, trying to process the implications. Meredith nodded. "The equipment alone must be worth tens of thousands of dollars. And those specimens, I've never seen anything like them. They were glowing, actually producing their own light." Victoria's mind immediately went to liability issues. Unauthorized. Research meant uninsured equipment, potential safety violations, and possible breaches of their federal research agreements. If the National Science Foundation or their other funding agencies discovered that facilities were being used for undisclosed projects, it could jeopardize millions of dollars in grants. But there was another side to consider. Victoria had known Harrison Webb for 8 years. He was one of their most respected researchers, with an impeccable record of published papers and successful grant applications. If he was conducting secret research, there had to be significant reasons behind his decision. "Did Dr. Webb see you?" she asked. "No, he was asleep when I found him. I decided not to wake him and to report it through proper channels instead." Victoria appreciated Meredith's professionalism. A less experienced security guard might have created a scene or, worse, ignored the situation entirely. After Meredith left, Victoria spent the next hour reviewing Webb's personnel file and recent research activities. His official projects were all progressing normally, with regular reports and appropriate documentation. But she noticed several small anomalies in his equipment requests and laboratory usage logs that now made sense in light of Meredith's report. At 10 a.m., she called Webb's office. His voice sounded tired when he answered. "Harrison, I need to see you in my office as soon as possible. We need to discuss your recent research activities." There was a long pause before he responded. "I'll be right there." When Webb arrived 15 minutes later, he looked like a man who hadn't slept properly in months. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He sat down heavily in the chair across from her desk. "I suppose this is about last night," he said quietly. Victoria studied his face. "Harrison, in 12 years as administrator, I've dealt with budget overruns, safety violations, personnel conflicts, and funding disputes. But I've never had to address unauthorized research being conducted in our facilities. Help me understand what's happening." Webb looked out the window toward the ocean for a long moment before responding. "Victoria, what if I told you I'd discovered something that could change underwater exploration forever? Something that could generate millions in licensing revenue for the Institute and establish us as leaders in a completely new field of marine biotechnology?" I'd say that sounds exactly like the kind of discovery we have protocols for handling. And I'd say that those protocols would ensure that corporate interests control the research before we fully understand its implications. Victoria felt the familiar tension between institutional requirements and scientific innovation. She'd seen promising research projects get bogged down in bureaucracy, And she'd also seen the disasters that resulted from inadequate oversight. "Show me," she said finally. Webb looked surprised. "Show you what?" "Your research. I want to see what's worth risking your career over." For the first time since entering her office, Webb smiled. "Victoria, what I'm about to show you is going to change everything you think you know about marine biology." Tommy Chun had been Dr. Webb's graduate research assistant for 18 months, and he'd developed a keen sense for when his mentor was hiding something. The signs had been accumulating for weeks. Unexplained equipment purchases, cryptic references to evening observations, and a general air of excitement mixed with paranoia that seemed completely out of character for the normally methodical scientist. When Tommy arrived at the lab that Thursday morning, he found Dr. Webb in animated conversation with Victoria Ashworth, the Institute administrator. Both of them looked like they'd been awake all night, and there was an energy in the room that Tommy had never experienced before. "Tommy," Dr. Webb said, "please close the door and have a seat. We need to talk." Over the next hour, Tommy learned about research that seemed like something from a science fiction movie. Dr. Webb described bioluminescent organisms with communication capabilities that could revolutionize underwater technology. Ms. Ashworth explained the administrative challenges of conducting unauthorized research, and both of them made it clear that Tommy was being brought into a situation that could make or break his academic career. "I've been watching you work," Dr. Webb said. "You have the technical skills and the intellectual curiosity for this project. But more importantly, you understand the ethical implications of scientific research." Tommy felt overwhelmed. As a graduate student, he was still learning to navigate the complex world of academic research. The prospect of being involved in potentially groundbreaking work was thrilling, but the risks were enormous. "What happens if we get caught?" he asked. Victoria leaned forward. "We're not getting caught, Tommy. We're bringing this research into compliance with institutional protocols while protecting its integrity. But what if the research doesn't work out? What if these organisms don't lead to the breakthroughs Dr. Webb thinks they will?" Dr. Webb smiled. "That's exactly the right question to ask. The truth is, we don't know yet. That's why it's called research. But the preliminary results suggest something remarkable." Tommy thought about his own academic goals. He'd come to Ocean View to study marine ecology, hoping to eventually work in conservation biology. This research seemed far removed from his original interests, but the potential applications for underwater environmental monitoring were significant. "Can I see the organisms?" he asked Dr. Webb, and Victoria exchanged glances. "That would mean you're committing to be part of this project," Victoria said. "Once you see the research, you'll be bound by confidentiality agreements and institutional protocols." Tommy considered his options. He could walk away now and continue with his original research plan, avoiding any potential complications. Or he could take a risk on something that might change the course of his career. "I want to see them," he said. An hour later, standing in Lab 7, surrounded by tanks of glowing organisms, Tommy understood why Dr. Webb had been willing to risk everything. The creatures were unlike anything he'd studied in his marine biology courses. They pulsed with light in complex patterns that seemed almost intentional, as if they were trying to communicate. "The really remarkable thing," Dr. Webb explained, "is that they respond to different chemical stimuli by changing their light patterns. It's not just random bioluminescence. It's a sophisticated signaling system." Tommy watched, fascinated, as Dr. Webb introduced a small sample of seawater with elevated nitrogen levels into one of the tanks. Within minutes, the organism's light patterns shifted from blue-green pulses to rapid yellow flashes. They're detecting chemical changes in their environment and communicating that information through light, Tommy said, understanding the implications immediately. "Exactly. Now imagine if we could decode their signaling system and replicate it artificially. We could create underwater sensors that communicate complex environmental data through light signals. As Tommy spent the rest of the day learning about the research, he realized that he wasn't just joining a scientific project. He was becoming part of something that could transform marine science. The risks were real, but the potential rewards were extraordinary. By evening, he'd made his decision. He would help Dr. Webb and Ms. Ashworth find a way to continue this research while satisfying institutional requirements. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he wanted to be part of discovering what these remarkable organisms could teach them about communication, technology, and the hidden complexities of marine life. Professor Janet Morrison had been department head of marine sciences for 6 years, and she thought she'd seen every possible research complication. But when Victoria Ashworth called an emergency meeting for Friday morning to discuss an unusual situation involving unauthorized research with significant commercial potential, Janet knew she was about to encounter something entirely new. The meeting included Dr. Webb, his graduate assistant Tommy Chun, night security guard Meredith Cole, and administrator Victoria Ashworth. As each person described their role in discovering and evaluating the secret research project, Janet found herself both impressed by the scientific potential and concerned about the institutional implications. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Janet said after hearing all the perspectives. "Harrison, you've been conducting unauthorized research for 6 months using personal funds and diverted resources. Meredith discovered this during routine security rounds. Victoria has determined that while there were protocol violations, the research has significant commercial potential. And Tommy has verified that the scientific methods are sound and the results are promising." Everyone nodded. "And now you want my help in finding a way to continue this research within institutional guidelines, while protecting its commercial potential from premature corporate involvement." "That's correct," Victoria said. Janet looked around the room at the assembled group. In her years as department head, she'd learned that the most significant scientific breakthroughs often happened when researchers were willing to take risks and think outside conventional frameworks. But she'd also seen promising research projects destroyed by inadequate planning and poor institutional relationships. "Harrison, show me the organisms," she said. 2 hours later, standing in Lab 7, Janet understood why everyone in the room had been willing to bend rules to protect this research. The bioluminescent creatures were remarkable, and Dr. Webb's documentation suggested applications that could establish OceanView as a leader in marine biotechnology. "Here's what we're going to do," she announced to the group. "First, we're going to document everything that's been done so far and bring it into compliance with institutional protocols. Harrison, you'll submit a formal research proposal for continuing this work through official channels." Dr. Webb looked concerned. "But what about corporate interference?" "Second, we're going to establish a new category of protected research for projects with significant commercial potential. This will allow us to control the timing and manner of any corporate partnerships." Victoria smiled. "That's actually brilliant. It protects the research while satisfying our funding obligations. Third, we're going to create an after-hours research program that allows approved projects to continue outside normal laboratory hours. This will prevent future situations where researchers feel they need to work in secret." Tommy raised his hand. "What happens to the research that's already been completed?" "That brings me to the fourth point. We're going to establish a technology transfer office that specializes in marine biotechnology. This will ensure that any commercial applications benefit the Institute and support future research." Janet looked around the room at each person. "Meredith, your professionalism in handling this situation showed exactly the kind of judgment we need in our security staff. I'm recommending you for additional training in scientific security protocols." Meredith beamed with pride. "Victoria, I want you to work with our legal team to develop the new research protection policies. Harrison and Tommy, you'll continue your research under the new framework, with additional funding and proper institutional support. Over the following months, the bioluminescent research project became a model for how innovative science could be conducted within institutional frameworks while protecting commercial potential. The organism's communication capabilities led to breakthrough developments in underwater monitoring systems, and the licensing revenue supported expanded marine research programs. More importantly, the incident led to permanent changes in how Ocean View Research Institute approached innovative research. The new after-hours research program and technology transfer office attracted additional scientists and funding, establishing the institute as a leader in translating marine science discoveries into practical applications. Dr. Webb's secret research had not only succeeded scientifically, but had also created new institutional capabilities that benefited the entire research community. Sometimes, Janet reflected, the most important discoveries happened not just in the laboratory, but in finding better ways to support the people who were brave enough to explore the unknown.